My name is John Dalton. Today is June 24th, 2010. We're here to do the interview with Chris Carter for the Archive of American Television in Malibu, California. I would like to take about 10 minutes to get some background in early years and influence information. What was your name at birth?
Christopher Carl Carter, Triple C.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in Compton, California. I'm straight out of Compton, in 1956.
What was your father's name?
William Charles Carter.
What did he do for a living?
He was in heavy construction.
What was your mother's name?
Catherine Carter.
What did she do?
She was a housewife.
What traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
A work ethic, definitely a work ethic.
Do you have any siblings?
I have a younger brother, 5 years younger.
When you were growing up, what activities most interested you?
I was an avid baseball player, baseball fan. I was a reader, mostly read a lot, not science fiction, coincidentally.
What did you read?
I read, the things that kids usually read, but I tended more towards literature.
What television shows did you watch with your family?
I was also a very voracious consumer of television when I was a kid, and it was during the years of Gilligan's Island, the Friday night lineup of Brady Bunch, Partridge Family, and Love American Style. So I had lots of good or bad television, depending on how you look at it.
What shows would you say sort of had an impact on you when you were growing up?
There were lots of shows that did. A show called Paladin did. Mannix was a favorite of mine. Loved that show. So detective genre shows. Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, Night Gallery. These are the scary shows that sort of became the sort of basis of what I would do later.
Do you remember any particular episodes of those anthology shows you just mentioned that you particularly liked or had an influence?
Of course, the episode of the Twilight Zone that I remember most was the one with the Phantom on the wing of the plane. That was something that stuck with me as a kid. But beyond that, I have no recollection right now.
How old are you when you first started writing?
I was young, but I didn't get really recognition as a writer until I was of college age.
What were the first kind of things you were writing at a young age when you were young?
Just creative writing, writing stories. I was imaginative as a kid.
What high school did you attend?
I went to Bellflower High School.
And where did you attend college?
Long Beach State University.
What did you study?
I was a journalism major.
What made you decide to go into journalism?
I had aspirations of being a writer, and I knew it was a way you could actually get paid to write.
What, as a college student, what were your interests as far as journalism went? What areas did you want to explore?
I was a magazine journalism major, so I was interested in writing for magazines, features.
And what was your first professional journalism job after you got out of college?
I did an internship at Surfing Magazine. I'm a lifelong surfer, so my first paying job was at Surfing Magazine.
And how long did you stay at Surfing?
I was at Surfing for on the staff for about 13 years, but I was in-house as an editor for about 5 years.
Any memorable experiences that you want to discuss that happened during that time?
I was a young man, so I got to travel the world, surf. I didn't get paid much at all, but it was sort of a very dreamy life.
You felt that in later years, did that influence your writing at all, those experiences traveling the world?
What mostly influenced my experience and my work later on was really the discipline I developed there, because I had to write a lot. And it also taught me about deadlines. We had to put out a monthly magazine, so it taught me how to do things serially.
So how did you make the transition into screenwriting?
I met the woman who's now my wife, and she was a screenwriter. And I had a story to tell. She encouraged me to tell it, and that script got a lot of attention. and I wrote a second script that got me a feature deal at Disney.
And how did you sort of learn the mechanics? Was it your wife?
Yeah,
Of the format and the mechanics of
it's
screenwriting?
it's very easy to learn the format of screenwriting because there are so many scripts out there to read, and of course that doesn't make you a screenwriter, but you the format, the form of screenwriting was something that you can pick up just by reading a screenplay.
What was the screenplay that first got you noticed by Jeffrey Katzenberg?
Yeah, it was called Bad O, and nothing ever happened with it, and that's probably a good thing.
What was it about?
It was just about a sort of almost cartoonish hero who was a sort of crusader for justice.
Do you remember any of the other early scripts that you wrote?
The script that I originally wrote was about three kids who are baseball players who are seniors in high school and getting ready to go off to Vietnam. It's called National Pastime.
Let's get back to the Katzenberg screenplay. How did you get it to him?
I was lucky enough to have a contact, a soon-to-be relative, who was an agent who got it to Disney right when the regime change was going on there, when Eisner and Katzenberg had come over from Paramount. So they were spending a lot of money, I think, in acquiring personnel over at Disney. So I was lucky to be a part of that original sort of energy impulse over there.
You mentioned your wife before. What did she do at that time? What was she involved in?
My wife was a screenwriter, as I said, and she had written, to that point, I think she had written a couple of television movies, and she had a feature produced while we were at Disney. I was there actually she was at Disney with me at the same time, coincidentally, on another hallway of the same building, and she wrote a feature with her writing partner called Big Business that was made there.
And I'm sorry, what's your wife's name?
My wife is Dory Carter.
Dory Carter. And in those early days, like, what was your impression of Katzenberg and all those guys?
I was sort of awed by them, and they were very hands-on. So I got to spend time, meeting with them, meeting with Michael Eisner, hearing what he had to say. It was a really heady time, and I didn't actually know how lucky I was until later on.
And you found that Eisner and Katzenberg actually helped your writing?
Well, they inspired it because they were hungry for good product and good material. And I remember I wrote a television pilot there that Jeffrey Katzenberg singled out as something that he loved. Nothing ever happened with it, but it was good feedback for a young writer.
How did you get your development deal at Walt Disney Pictures?
I was lucky enough to have a second screenplay read and not purchased, but given I think it was a 3-picture deal, an office, and eventually a secretary, and I was in the movie business.
And do you remember some of the other projects that you were working on at that time?
I really was not working on anything at that time. I had no idea that I was going to be in the movie business as quickly as I was. But while I was there, I had a chance to write several different Disney Sunday movies. And 2 of them were made, and a television pilot was made while I was there, too.
And so you wanted to write for television at that time?
I didn't actually anticipate writing for television, or didn't imagine myself as a television writer. But the opportunities came because there were producers producing Disney Sunday movies, which was the Sunday night movie at the time. They would come by my office and introduce themselves and ask me if I wanted to, go to work on a television project. And I never said no to anyone.
And a lot of those were sort of comedic in nature. Do you consider yourself a comedy writer?
I would consider myself a light comedy writer. I don't consider myself to be like a sitcom comedy writer.
What is it that you think that Katzenberg et al. Saw in you in those early years?
I think that they saw that I was imaginative, that I was writing things that were not, that were offbeat, that were original. I think they saw an originality, I think.
Talk about Brendan Tartikoff. How did you come to meet and work with him?
I met Brandon, I think, originally playing in a softball game that I would play every Saturday. It so happened that I had a pilot being produced at NBC. He knew me, he knew the work, and we became fast friends.
And you developed shows with him?
Yes, I developed shows with him and for him ultimately at NBC Productions, where I moved after Disney. He tricked me into doing a project that was on the Disney Sunday movie Wheel, and by offering me another pilot to write apart from this thing called Brand New Life that was on for a short amount of time.
Did Tartikoff have a lot of input when you would hand a script in? Would he make changes and suggestions?
Yeah, he was the studio head of NBC Productions. It was his little studio, and he treated it with a lot of care and love, and we got a lot of direction from him.
And was his direction particularly helpful?
He had a really keen sense of what worked on television, and that's why I think the network was so successful for all those years.
Talk a little bit about Rags to Riches. What was it about?
I worked on this show as my first producing job, really, on a show called Rags to Riches. It was right after I had produced a failed television pilot, and I realized that as a writer I wanted to learn how to produce. And so I called one of the development executives at NBC at the time, and I said, "Can you put me on a show?" And he said, "I can put you on one of 3 shows right away," he said. And he was anxious to do this, and as anxious as I was. He said, "I can put you on Miami Vice, I can put you on Crime Story, or I can put you on a show called Rags to Riches." So you would think that the sort of smart guy would go on Miami Vice or Crime Story, which were 2 kind of hit shows at the time. Certainly Miami Vice was. But I saw that the writing staff was based in Los Angeles while the show shot in Miami. And I saw that on Crime Story, the show was shot in Las Vegas, but the writing staff was in Los Angeles. And so I realized I wasn't going to get really the kind of producing experience that I was looking for. And so I chose this show called Rags to Riches, which was really about three dancing girls and a sort of Daddy Warbucks character played by Joe Bologna. And it was great because I got to do everything. I got to work with the wardrobe department, makeup, casting, musical. There were musical numbers, so I got to work with a choreographer. And it was just a great experience because it was completely hands-on.
How long did that show last?
That show lasted, I think, 2 seasons, but I was on it for about, or a season and a half, and I was on it for the last half.
And when it ended, did you regret not having chosen one of the other 2?
No, it was. I really got the experience I was looking for. Right after it ended, which was like roughly mid-season, I had a chance to do another Disney Sunday movie with my wife, and so I went from one thing to another.
What was the Disney Sunday movie that you worked on?
We wrote something which is, looking back, we just didn't have the time or the money to do it justice, but we wrote a cute little television an episode of the Disney Sunday movie, which was a sort of backdoor pilot called Meet the Muncies.
Do you have any other favorites of those Disney Sunday movies you worked on?
I think that Meet the Muncies is probably my favorite. We had a really terrific cast.
Who's in it?
Carmine Caridi played the father. Nana Visitor played Billy Muncie, and that's what I'm remembering right now.
Talk a little bit about Brand New Life.
Brand New Life was a pilot that Brandon Tartikoff sort of tricked me into making, but it ended up being a show. I think we would do 7 or 8 episodes of it. It starred Barbara Eden and Don Murray, and they played a sort of blended partners in a blended family.
And that was a comedy?
It was a very light comedy, right?
Why did you leave Disney?
It was just sort of a natural progression for me to leave as a writer at Disney to become a producer on Rags to Riches.
How did you come to work for 20th Century Fox in 1992?
an executive named Peter Roth, who had been at Stephen Cannell before, had seen my work, liked it, had called me in several times to see about running shows at Cannell, and I never took the bait. But he was a fan, and so when he took over the reins at 20th Century Television, I think I was one of his original acquisitions there to write and develop television series, television pilots. And I think I wrote one pilot before I wrote The X-Files.
Do you remember anything about the pilot you wrote?
It was a law pilot. It was about a sort of washed-up lawyer, a la Paul Newman in The Verdict, who rallies a young group of lawyers to fight a case.
And was it produced?
It was never produced, but it was actually subsequently the idea was bought from me by the executive who developed it at ABC, and I don't know whatever happened to it past that.
How did the X-Files come about?
The X-Files came about as a result of my love as a kid of two movies on television called Kolchak the Night Stalker, which were fantastic and scary and had left a really big impression on me. And I looked at the television landscape and I realized there wasn't anything scary on television. And while I consider myself a light comedy writer, I think that the thriller genre is probably my strong suit. And so I decided to do this television show with two FBI agents, and it's no coincidence that Silence of the Lambs had just been in the theaters and it was a big hit, and I loved it. Two FBI agents who were investigating the paranormal from two different points of view.
Talk about The Night Stalker. You were a fan of the original TV movie.
Yes.
How did it influence you?
Well, I just remember Darren McGavin and the character he played and how no one believed him. But I remember how scary it was for me. There were two movies that preceded the television series of The Night Stalker, which I don't really remember. But I remember those vividly, those two movies, and it's something that stuck with me. I actually pitched the idea to do The Night Stalker again to Brandon Tartikoff when I was at NBC, and he didn't take the bait.
Were you also a fan of the series that followed the original TV movie?
I don't remember the series really. I now know of it because I went back and looked at some of the episodes. So I think that the series sort of was a watered down version of the movies.
What was the process of coming up with the characters from X-Files?
I just had in mind, it's funny, I remember writing an 18-page single-space outline for the television series, for the pilot. And I described Agent Mulder as more MTV VJ than FBI agent. I wanted him to be sort of rumpled and a little bit young and hip. And I imagined Scully as the sort of, for me, the ideal woman, smart, dedicated, and I chose to flip the characters. Typically, you'd make the sort of female, the sort of intuitive, emotional person, the believer, and the male as more skeptical. But I decided to change that and make Agent Mulder the believer and Agent Scully the skeptic.
Were they based on anyone you knew in particular?
No, I chose the names Mulder because Mulder was my mother's maiden name, and Scully because Vince Scully, when I grew up in Los Angeles, was the sort of voice of God.
What was the talk about the process of developing the premise of the show?
I had pitched. It's funny, they didn't buy the original pitch for the television show, and I was, because Peter Roth was so enthusiastic about the idea, he was able to get me in to pitch it a second time. The second pitch involved me coming in with what was called a Roper survey, a survey that had been done by scientists, actually a Harvard scientist, about the alien abduction phenomenon. And what he learned was that there was a very high percentage of people in the United States who believed in aliens, believed in alien abduction, and some who even believed they'd been abducted. So I thought this is interesting that there are scientists, there are people who are studying this phenomenon from a scientific and skeptical point of view, but it actually opened the door for the investigation by law enforcement as well. I'd seen an interview on CNN with an FBI agent who had investigated satanic ritual abuse and claimed that he had not found any evidence of it. But I thought it was interesting that the FBI was actually investigating these kinds of cases.
At the time when you first developed the show, were you more of a skeptic yourself or more of a believer yourself?
I think I'm naturally a skeptic. I think that's the journalist in me. But I want to believe. That was also the poster that was on Mulder's wall, the I want to believe poster. It was that sort of prove it to me. I'm open, but prove it to me.
How much research did you do when you were developing the show?
I did a lot of research on the FBI, and the FBI was helpful to a point. But I had done a lot of research by reading the alien abduction literature and sort of steeping myself in that the world of the paranormal. Once
you had the show and the characters, talk about pitching it to Fox.
I pitched it once, I pitched it twice. The second time they bought it. But I think that they didn't know what it was. Ultimately, it replaced a show called Sightings that was on Friday nights at 9 o'clock. That was a more journalistic show. And I think in the beginning, I know in the beginning, they wanted the X-Files to be as realistic, almost like a docudrama. And they actually convinced me to put something at the beginning of the show that I didn't want to put there, which was based on actual events that actually appeared as a legend before the pilot episode. Because they weren't sure what it was that we were doing, and they weren't sure that you could do a show where you didn't wrap up the case with a nice little bow and explain everything at the end. I said, this is, I said to them, this is unexplained phenomena. You can't explain it, and that's the beauty of the show. But that was something that no one really understood at the beginning.
In those first few episodes, so did you make it more reality-based to appease Fox, or did you kind of go off in your own direction from the beginning?
We really went off in our own direction from the very beginning. Even though we took those first two episodes, which are really fundamental to the mythology of the show, we took those from the literature, if you will, on alien abduction, and the second episode features a place like Area 51, which is the sort of famous Nevada testing site that figures large in the alien abduction, genre.
How did Fox react to those first few weeks?
The reaction, well, originally the reaction to the pilot was great. I heard that when they screened it for the executives at Fox, that there was applause after the pilot, so it was really well received, and it was picked up with enthusiasm.
How did the show fit into Fox's approach and their schedule at the time?
I still think that they really didn't know quite what they had, what it was that was going to be appealing about this show besides the fact that they liked the pilot. They didn't know if it was going to be a show about aliens, alien abduction, about UFOs and extraterrestrials. They didn't quite understand that it was going to be, I think, more influenced by The Night Stalker, by these standalone episodes that were about paranormal science rather than just straight, alien abduction stories like we had done in the first two episodes.
You remember, thinking back, what Fox's place was in television at the time?
Fox was, and I guess still is, the fourth network. It did not have 10 o'clock programming, so we went right to the news after the show. So really, you were on like Friday night, you had a smaller audience, and I think you were actually given a lot more leeway because the ratings could be lower, and you would still be considered. You still could be considered a hit by getting a certain rating.
So that you would say the show had a better shot on Fox than it would have on maybe one of the other networks?
I think Fox was being seen as the more creative, maybe more imaginative, a little bit more offbeat place to do television.
So it was a good fit.
It really was a good fit. I think I don't know if the show would have been a hit on any other network.
Talk about casting your lead roles. What exactly were you looking for?
I was looking for, of course, telegenic actors. But I was looking for somebody, as I said, who was offbeat for the character of Mulder. Somebody who was smart, somebody who was irreverent, somebody who was funny. I lucked into David Duchovny. The casting director's name was Randy Stone, and he brought David in with a lot of encouragement that this was a person to look at.
Had you seen his previous work on Twin Peaks? Or
I had not seen any of his previous work, so he was brand new to me. I would end up seeing clips through the casting process. But I didn't realize how funny David was originally, because he's very dry. But he is one of the quickest wits I know.
And what do you think that he brought to the role once you started seeing him saying your lines that you might not have expected?
I think, this was a character who had to make you believe in the paranormal, and David had the ability to get out big blocks of dialogue to play the role of the informed believer. And he had to be as convincing to Agent Scully as he was to us. And so I think that what David brought was an intelligence, an intensity, and, of course, his humor.
Talk about casting Gillian Anderson.
Gillian came in, I remember the day. She was sort of disheveled. She looked like a little bit like a street urchin. She was, immediately I saw in her the young scientist. She was intense. She was smart. She had and I still think this is one of the most interesting things about her. She had it has to do with her breathing. She had an intensity about her, and if you really watch the X-Files closely, you can see in her that that intensity, I think, which is something that really made the scientist believable in the show.
Was she sort of, early on, you said you wrote her as like the ideal woman in your eyes. Did you feel that she fulfilled that?
Yeah, I think that Gillian, she not only is she attractive, but she was intelligent and able to deliver a lot of scientific information believably.
Talk about Mitch Pileggi.
Yeah. Mitch Pileggi was an actor who had come in and read for us in the first season several times, and I kept telling him we'd find a part for him. We didn't know that he would get a co-starring role and be with us for the life of the series.
How did Fox feel about those casting choices?
Mitch Pileggi didn't come until later, but David and Gillian were both actors that I had to fight for, if you will. I had to root for them in the audition process. They were not the only actors that read. There were several other actors that read for each of those parts.
Do you remember if there were any actors that Fox had suggested that you use or wanted to use instead of the ones you wound up using?
There was of course, there were many voting parties in the room, including the network executive who wanted to go with another actor, not David Duchovny, and I was able to convince him and everyone else that David was the right choice for the show. The same with Gillian. I don't think anyone saw her as the bombshell that they might have imagined you'd want to cast being television, and they couldn't imagine her in a bikini probably. But Gillian was somebody that I lobbied for and won approval on later on too.
How important is casting, and how important was that fight to get those two actors cast?
Casting is all important in television and in entertainment, but The choice of David and Gillian ended up being brilliant, but the truth is I never really had the opportunity, besides maybe one small instance, to actually have them read together. So I didn't know what the chemistry would be. So that first day we shot with them together, which was in Mulder's office. It is a now sort of mythic scene where Scully goes down and visits Mulder, and he says, "Nobody down here but the FBI is most unwanted." But it's their first really sparring with one another about the merits of the paranormal, the paranormal.
Talk about the chemistry. Is it something that can be developed, or is it just there or not?
The chemistry is something that is just there or not. You really, I don't think, can develop it. And luckily, David Duchovny is a very charming man, and he was charming with Scully. And my wife always said that the beauty of Mulder and Scully was that Mulder always treated Scully with respect, and he was protective of her. And I think that came through very early on.
What was the premise of the pilot episode?
The pilot episode was about an alien abduction in a small town and the investigation of it by Mulder and Scully. And Scully's job in that pilot episode was to be really a spy for the FBI. They wanted to discredit Mulder and his paranormal investigations, his X-Files. So it really was the kickoff for that whole mythology arc, if you will. The other thing that it was the introduction of the story about Mulder's sister, that he believed she had been abducted, and he believed that his sister had been abducted, but he was unable to prove it, and that became a big part of the mythology arc as well.
When you were writing the pilot, did you have these arcs in mind?
I had the arc of Mulder's sister in mind. That was really what personalized the investigations for him.
What is the mythology arc?
The mythology arc is really the investigation of the government's conspiracy to keep the truth about the existence of extraterrestrials and or alien phenomena from the public.
Talk a little bit about filming the pilot. What do you remember most about that experience?
I remember we had tried to, or originally wanted to produce the pilot in Los Angeles, but we were unable to find a suitable forest. And so we sort of just uprooted the original small number of personnel that were working to try to produce the pilot here, and went up to Vancouver at the suggestion of Charlie Goldstein, who was the production executive on the X-Files, or actually at Fox. And so we went up to Vancouver because they had a great forest. It was, as David Duchovny said, 2 weeks that turned into 5 years.
It was for the forest originally. Did you consider going back to Los Angeles after the pilot?
We never considered going back to Los Angeles after the pilot because I realized that Vancouver was going to be the perfect place to shoot the show. You got something in Vancouver. You got a number of things in Vancouver. You've got, first of all, you have crews up there who have a fantastic work ethic, so we got that. You have a place that doesn't look like any place in particular, so it could look like many different places. And since we were doing episodes that took place around the United States, Vancouver really could double as almost anywhere with all kinds of different rural and urban settings. And the next thing we got was free atmosphere. Vancouver has a way of adding to the, I would call it the sort of eeriness and creepiness and gloominess that became a signature of the X-Files.
When you were filming the pilot, did you realize at the time that you had something special going on?
I approached that pilot. I mean, I was completely hands-on. I was behind the camera for every shot, and luckily we had a very collaborative. Luckily, we had a very collaborative director, Robert Mandel, And I was working with somebody who I've come to be very good friends with, who I had just met as a producer on the pilot, Dan Sackheim, and we powwowed a lot about the shots and the approach and the energy and the intent of scenes. So it was something that I was very hands-on with throughout the process.
And just getting back to the location for a second, when you made the choice to stay in Vancouver, did you get any flack about not returning to LA from any corners? Or?
No, it really was, it was considered a Hollywood North, and because it's only a couple hours by plane, it was manageable. The actors could still come home, but it took them about 5 years before they convinced us to finally come back to Los Angeles.
I think you touched a little on this before, but what was the initial reaction to the pilot when it was shown to executives and colleagues and test audiences?
Yeah, I think the pilot episode, because it was so unexpected, I think that it got a lot of attention just because it was offbeat. It was like nothing else on television, and that can work for you and against you, because if it's not like anything else on television, the chances are that it's going to be received with less enthusiasm than it might have otherwise. But I had actually developed a little main title sequence for it, and I had done a packet, sort of like a marketing packet. I had sort of gone all out to sort of sell the show with extra effort in the marketing.
Do you remember any specific changes that the network requested you make?
We had to cut about 10 minutes out of the pilot, so they requested that we make it airable, which was important. And
was it difficult to lose those 10 minutes?
It was very difficult to lose those 10 minutes, but in the end, you can always lose 10 minutes.
But there wasn't much about the actual content of the show?
No, they liked
because it had tested well.
Yeah, they liked what they saw because it had tested well.
So at the time, in those early days when you had written the pilot, how many episodes did you have mapped out?
I'd given them, as part of my sort of marketing campaign, marketing it to the network and to the studio, probably roughly about 10 episode ideas. I don't know if any of those ideas were actually ever used, because I had the good fortune of hiring really talented writers to come and work on the show from the get-go.
Talk about the night X-Files premiered. What do you remember about that night?
I honestly, as I sit here, I cannot remember the night that it premiered. There was so much effort and energy being put into the series by that point. I don't remember watching it on television that night for some reason.
Do you remember at all getting feedback after it first aired, or ratings, or? I
remember getting feedback before it aired. We went through the marketing, the testing process, which is where a group of people sit in a room and you're behind a two-way mirror, and you get to watch the people respond and react to the pilot. And there's also a television monitor that is up in your room, and it graphs their response as they dial the knobs. And I remember seeing those peaks and then those valleys, and my heart would dip, and I would see those peaks, and my enthusiasm and excitement would rise, and then I would see those valleys. I didn't realize the value of those peaks and those valleys, that you need to have periods of tension and periods of relief. It didn't make sense to me, and all of a sudden when I saw the graph, it made perfect sense to me that this is the sort of natural progression of a story. But I remember that in that test marketing that night, that there was one person in the room who, when asked how he liked the pilot, he said, I love it, it's perfect. I'll never forget that night. It was really a sort of a celebration of what we had all worked so hard on.
Would you say that that was almost more important to you than the first night it aired, I guess, since you don't remember?
As I don't remember the first night it aired, I think that night where I had a sort of captive audience was the thing that stuck with me.
Do you remember any print reviews, critics, like in those first early weeks?
I remember the LA Times, Howard Rosenberg said it had just enough air to keep this saucer afloat or something like that. The responses were, I think, across the board favorable, but I don't remember it being an instant hit.
Talk a little bit about the opening title sequence and theme music. How did you guys come up with that?
The opening title sequence, there's a sort of an X that appears in a kind of smoky environment, black and white, and I had actually done that little snippet as part of the marketing package for the original pilot, the original pitch of the pilot, and that image ended up staying with the show for the life of the series. But the main titles were done by a main title group whose name is escaping me right now, and they worked very hard on them. But I remember going in sort of 11th hour and saying we needed more images, and choosing the image of the face distorting and the seeds germinating, which were sort of back-to-back images. I came in and added a lot of images before the final cut. The music was, the theme music is done by Mark Snow. I sent him to the drawing board with lots of direction, and he came back to me with things that I rejected a number of times before we finally came up with, or before he finally came up with that
How long did it take
song.
for him to come up with the one that was finally used?
I think it took him, well, it took him several episodes, because the main titles actually didn't appear until several episodes into or the second, maybe it's the second episode it first appeared. So he was working on that during the summer when we were first producing the show. I think that he probably worked on the main title then, or main title theme for several months. And I had given him a Smith song called How Soon Is Now. And it has a really interesting guitar, sort of mournful guitar in it. And I thought that's what he was going to take from that song, because that's what I love so much about that song. And what he took in the end was the whistling. Morrissey is whistling at the end of that song, and he turned it into that theme song.
So he took the whistle and then handed you something, and did you give it back and say, well, I'd like it to be a little more, or did he?
What he gave me was the theme. I didn't tinker with it or tamper with it. It was it came fully formed.
Talk about the slogan, "The truth is out there."
That was something that sort of just came to me. I was going to put something actually different at the end of that title sequence, but "The truth is out there" sort of had that wonderful double entendre. The truth is out there, and the truth is, far out there. I remember that when I pitched that to two writers that were on the show, Howard Gordon and Alex Gonza, they said that it's a winner, and we stuck with that.
Let's get back to the characters of Mulder and Scully. In that first season, what motivates them?
Mulder is motivated by the personal storyline, which is the abduction of his sister. But he's also motivated by being a sort of a thorn in the side of the FBI, sort of pushing the limits of what could be investigated by them, and what their area of investigation was. So he's pushed by being a sort of rebel. Scully is pushed by the insistence of the FBI that she cast a sharp eye to the cases that Mulder is investigating and try to really run him out of business.
Is she happy in that role of being the one who's...
Because she's an ethical person, she's sort of caught between doing what she's been told to do and what she thinks is right. So she really is, she quickly befriends Mulder, or Mulder quickly befriends her, and they become very close partners very quickly on.
In what way did your initial ideas and direction for the character change once you saw the actors playing them?
I think that what happens with a television series is that you do a pilot, and then when you start to staff up to do a television series, you get a lot of different points of view. You get other people adding to the characters. You get the actors adding to the characters. So you actually start to write to their strengths. But what you also get is you get these writers who come in with storylines that end up sort of adding to and shaping the characters as you go forward.
Do you think that the relationship between them in the first season was how you had initially envisioned it, or did it take on an unexpected direction once you saw the actors playing?
The relationship was as I had anticipated. It was a platonic relationship. There was no hint of a love affair between Mulder and Scully, although quickly people saw the sexual tension there, and quickly people wanted that sexual tension to be released.
Did that surprise you?
It excited me.
In the first season, was it sort of important to you to sort of not have the romance consummated or necessarily, explored that much in the first year? Was that sort of a rule you set for yourself, despite, what the viewers and critics may have been saying?
No, it was really right for the characters. I think putting them together would have been the death of that relationship in a way, because it would have changed it forever, and they would not have been able to, go out and investigate. If they were sharing a hotel room rather than separate rooms, it would have just been a completely different show.
Was there ever any pressure from the network to kind of get them together at any point?
I think after the first season, a lot of the pressure from the network or the studio was off, because we had shown that in those 25 episodes that we produced, that we knew what we were doing. And even when we, in the 25th episode of the first season, we killed off one of the main characters. The network was with us on that, and even though that was shocking, I think, to the audience, they were, I think they believed that we knew what we were doing.
What were the themes that you explored in the first season?
Really, the X-Files is a series of mythology episodes, and it's a series of standalone episodes that were a sort of combination of horror, suspense, certainly with aspects of the thriller and the intensity of that pacing. It was really any number of things and any number of shows. Ultimately, it became a show that could support comedy episodes as well.
What did you want to accomplish in that first year?
Of course, all you're trying to accomplish in the first year is staying on the air. But I think it wasn't until about episode 7 or 8 that I really started seeing what the X-Files could become, and that was a result of having just very good writers who had come onto the staff.
What was sort of the theme of the mythology arc as it relates to the real world?
Early on, I got a letter from a fan who said that the episodes that were the most successful in her mind were the episodes that were very personal. So the mythology arc became the personal arc for Mulder and Scully. And as Scully became more involved in the investigation of the alien abductions and in Mulder, the truth about Mulder's sister, it became a personal journey for her as well. So the mythology arc was not just an investigation of the paranormal, it was an investigation of Mulder and Scully themselves.
Did you prefer the arc episodes or the comedy episodes? Which were your favorite to write?
I liked writing both, and both had their own particular challenges. The mythology, because you didn't want it to become so convoluted that people couldn't understand it, and you wanted it to follow, it had to be logical from beginning to end, and that was a challenge in itself, because you didn't want to lose the people that were casual viewers, the people that would come in for the standalone episodes. So each had their own challenge.
Was it difficult to keep the story straight on the mythology arc? If you were writing an episode, did you have to go back and see what was said about this topic before, so you didn't contradict yourself?
Really, when you're so immersed in the process and you are telling these stories, which are very personal to you and to the characters, you tend to remember what you've written, or emotionally you're sort of following the arc of the characters themselves. So for me, I never really needed to go backwards. But if you were to ask me today about aspects of the mythology, I'd probably have to go back and refresh my memory, because it was something that ran over 9 years.
Sure. Talk about your decision to have Mulder get shot at the end of the first season in the episode Beyond the Sea.
Yeah, that was in the middle of the first season, and that was two writers, Morgan and Wong, who really put their stamp on the show in a big way, and they pushed the series early on in a way that I might not have done. And it was really for the benefit of the show. It was really showing that you could not hold back anything early on and still have places to go with the show through the run of the series.
Did anyone object to having him get shot in the middle of the first season?
It's scary to do, and also in that episode, Scully's father dies, and so you're really taking away an important character and an important and somebody who you could develop storylines around. And because Scully's father had always been an influence in her life and had been someone who was disappointed that she had gone to the FBI rather than to follow her career as a doctor, there was somebody who died with some disappointment.
Was there any sort of personal aspect to some of these stories about Scully and her father, or Mulder and his sister? Were these things that were based on things that happened to you or people you knew? Or?
I think really they were true to the characters and not true to anyone or any of us. Once those characters were established, we sort of knew what we would only learn what their relationships were like with Scully's sister, for example, and Mulder's mother. We actually investigated Mulder's father's role in the X-Files, and had come to find out that Mulder's father had been possibly responsible for the abduction of his sister.
How'd you come up with ideas for cases on X-Files?
Early on, I think we mined all the obvious areas about ghosts and the aspects of the paranormal that were sort of obvious. And even though we did some very original episodes, I think that we did a werewolf early on. So I think that there were some easy pickings at the very beginning. But the show actually became, I think, more interesting as it went on, because we had to really start looking farther and into weird science for our episodes.
Did you sort of set rules and parameters for yourself as far as stories go?
We had a rule that it was only as scary as it was believable, and it had to take place within the realm of extreme possibility. The more you could make these what-if stories believable as a sort of paranormal science, and not science fiction, the more successful the show was. I really didn't think of it as science fiction early on. I thought of it as speculative science. But I think that's, and I may have gotten that from Steven Spielberg, who said the same thing about Close Encounters.
Were there any concerns about being too scary or going too far for network television?
Yeah, there were times when, I remember in the 4th season, there's an episode done by those same writers, Glenn Morgan and James Wong, called Home. And it's a very scary episode. And while it is not a violent episode, you actually imagine it is violent, because the action cuts just before you actually see these acts of violence on. And I remember getting a call the day after from Peter Roth saying we had indeed gone too far. There had been complaints that had gone as far as the corporate offices in New York, and that we had to scale back. But that has now become one of the most beloved episodes of the show.
And the the nature of the complaints were that it was too scary?
It was too scary, too violent, and had pushed the limits of taste because there's the suggestion of incest in the episode.
And in the wake of that, did you, for a time anyway, shy away from those kinds of topics?
You know, I think it was something of a governor on us, but I think that we were always pushing the limits.
How long, in your opinion, did it sort of take the show to find its core audience?
You know, I think by the first season, the end of the first season, because we did 25 episodes that first season, it had found a solid audience. But it wasn't until we moved to Sunday night that I think it got what I would call its large cult following.
Who are X-Files fans? What's the demographic?
It's interesting. I think that we ended up doing these conventions, X-Files conventions, and you would get at the conventions 3 generations: grandma, mom, or dad, and the kids. And so you'd get sort of 3 generations there who were all fans of the show. So it really was hard to come up with a perfect demographic. We were a big hit in the 18 to 49-year-old demographic, but as far as who were the X-Files watchers, I would say the most avid fans were probably women, and continue to be. That's what I'd say.
What is it about the show, do you think, that attracts women?
I think that what attracted women was David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson. Simply, I think that they are the secret to the success of the show.
And would you also say that's the multi-generational appeal, or is there more?
I think because it was smart and it didn't write down, I think it tended to find a smart audience. I think that the X-Files, because it was always scary, it was always thoughtful, it was always intelligent, and it was always unexpected. I think that was really what found a following.
Talk about the first season finale. Why did you decide to close down the X-Files department?
We decided to close down the X-Files because it was going to be interesting to reopen it or find a way to reopen it the next season. And in killing the main character, we gave Mulder something new to investigate. Or in killing the Deep Throat character, a main character, Mulder would have something to investigate, because this was sort of a father figure to him, a person who had come to him and secretly guided some of his investigations.
Was Fox resistant to this idea of the final episode closing down the X-Files?
I know that the pilot, the final episode was really well received as a script, so I have to say that they had no objections.
So you've mentioned that the network was pretty supportive after the first season, so there was no disagreement with them once you were a hit about the direction of the show?
Early on, as I was mentioning, they didn't understand that we weren't going to explain what had happened in every episode, that this was unexplained phenomena and it was best left unexplained. And it made it more mysterious and made the stories more interesting to leave them open-ended rather than closed episodes. That took some, I think, some convincing. There were times when I would remember having to go over to the executive building and go up and sit in an executive's office and pitch episodes that we wanted to do that they were reluctant to do. And I think one of them was Beyond the Sea, because they thought it was going to be too much like Silence of the Lambs. And ultimately, I think that that kind of tension that was between the showrunners and the executives actually added to the show, because we were out to prove ourselves to them. And we were, I think, as a group, very competitive with each other in trying to do the best episodes.
And